Chapter 2, An Analysis of the Thinking Process 1. What are thoughts? A new perspective. Did you ever wonder where your mind came from? How did it come about that humans can construct elaborate mathematical systems, anticipate future events, and plan accordingly? What are thoughts? Are you the originator of thoughts, or are you a passive receiver of thoughts originating from others? What about telepathy? We will consider the process of thinking in some detail in the next sections. Take some notes of what follows and try to connect the ideas with situations you encounter in your daily life. Where not mentioned otherwise, quotes are from my book Mysteries of the Human Mind, that is freely available on the archive. Org or academia. Edu. The character of thoughts. Scientists have no idea what a thought actually is. They seem to assume that the network of neurons in one's brain somehow produces thoughts, but have no idea how that works, let alone how abstract thinking comes about. Thoughts come in a wide variety and are of different quality. For example, one aspect of thought is desire. There is lust and gross passion, but there can also be lofty aspirations. People can be obsessed and even possessed by thoughts. A thought can grow so strong that one can't resist it. Let's have a look at the characteristics of living beings. What is required for something to be called alive? Criteria differ among biologists, but we can use the following ones. 1. Living beings are subject to the processes of birth and death. 2. Living beings require food of some kind, have a metabolism. 3. Living beings have a character of their own. 4. Living beings can procreate in some way. 5. Living beings do have some consciousness of their own. Analysis of thought will learn that thoughts conform to all of these points. 1. Regarding history, one often talks about the birth of an idea in a certain era. Many examples can be given. Not only such dramatic events as the French Revolution, but many other gradually unfolding episodes like the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the computer era, the information superhighway, etc., can be seen in this way. After the birth of an idea, it will grow, evolve to some extent, and finally die, to be replaced by another idea, paradigma. 2. We all know that we often have some desires, maybe to buy something or so. If we fulfill this desire, the associated thought often quickly dies. If we can't fulfill it, one of two things can happen: we either forget about it or this desire becomes really strong, up to the point that we have to fulfill this desire. We almost drive ourselves crazy until we have got this wish fulfilled. We are constantly feeding this thought with our desire energy, the fourth aspect of thinking, see further on, making this thought really strong and big. Many examples can be found of this process, showing that we can lose control of ourselves and get entangled in some acts, resulting in a really messy situation. Oh, how do we desire that we never had done these things? Thoughts take form and last longer corresponding to the degree to which they are sustained. They will die sooner when we pay little attention to them. 3. Thoughts having a character of their own can be understood as follows. My paraphrase of Koch's line of thought: when we recall the fact that we are sometimes confronted with strange or incomprehensible thoughts, which we soon forget, then we can understand this to be due to the deviant character of these thoughts from our own character. These thoughts simply cannot find a proper soil in us to root and sprout. Inversely, a thought or idea will strike a note in our consciousness much easier if the character of this idea conforms to the character of our personality. Racist ideas will more easily resonate in one's mind if one has an element of or a tendency towards racism already in oneself. Art will be more appreciated if we have a sense of beauty or harmony developed in ourselves. For, the procreation of thought might seem a little odd at first sight. Yet, we all know about this. If a teacher tells us about something, and we accept that, then these thoughts find a fertile soil in our minds, enabling them to grow, flower, and come to fruition. On our turn, we can transfer these ideas to others, sow these thought seeds, where they can find a new life. Nowadays, we hear about memes, but I take this one step further, saying that thoughts are more than just information floating in the air. 5. A thought has its own consciousness. We all know that we can be quite obsessed with thoughts, or by thoughts, sometimes. We have great difficulty to break out of some strong thought influence. The thought has grown to gigantic proportions, blocking other thoughts out of our consciousness. How to deal with such a situation? We must concentrate with all our efforts on other thoughts, especially we must get into action, to break out of this iron hold. A constructive approach is given in the next section. A positive example of this own consciousness is when we are captivated by some grand, inspirational thought, leading us into unselfish acts we normally would not do. Koch draws the conclusion that thoughts are living beings. Besides having a vibratory aspect, they have life in themselves, too. Then follows Koch's argument that the stream of thoughts that pass through our minds consists of hosts of living beings. He adds that our faculty of thinking is, so to speak, the capability of perceiving thought forms or images. We will soon see that we do not have to passively undergo the influences of these beings. Koch continues. The concept of the stream of thoughts as a host of living beings provides an important key to changing our lives. By applying this knowledge, see also subsequent sections, we can open new vistas of perception and experience. Of course, we have to experience the correctness of this point of view in our own thinking before we can apply this key. The following part up to the elaboration is a loose paraphrase and translation of a non-public document from D.J. Koch I have in my possession. In order to investigate the nature of thoughts as living beings, it is advised to see oneself more as a witness of thoughts than as a creator of thoughts. Think of yourself as part of the one life that is the essence of all beings. That will make it easier to get into the state of witnessing thoughts. The process of thinking. Here, I repeat, with minor alterations, a part of what I wrote in my first book, Mysteries of the Human Mind. The wisdom tradition makes a division between conscious thinking and unconscious thinking. Unconscious thinking is what we all do too often. We uncritically accept the dogmas of science, commercial slogans, technological innovations, political propaganda, etc. It's quite easy for strong personalities to force ideas into the minds of people, as long as these last ones don't know anything about the effects of thoughts on themselves and the situation in the world. Yet, we should know better. We all know how war propaganda can drive people crazy. Propaganda, slogans, advertisements, and the like can easily influence people when they are not conscious of the effects of these messages. This ignorance about the process of thinking and the effects of thoughts on others and oneself has brought many disasters to mankind. We are in the illusion that we think consciously, that we control our thoughts, while the facts point in another direction. Fact is that we are drifting on the waves of thoughts projected and amplified by strong personalities who have clear reasons to do so, for personal gain, political power, commercial reasons, etc. Mind that this is all cleverly done. We are made to believe we have so many rights. What about our duties? Are made to believe that we need this or that latest object of technology. Do we need it really? We are made to believe almost anything. It's a scary situation. Mainstream media are in the hands of a few billionaires. That is not good for a well-balanced flow of information to the public. How can we break out of this passive kind of thinking? By conscious or clear thinking. Conscious thinking, observing the stream of thoughts. The recognition of thoughts as living beings is an important step towards conscious thinking, because it leaves no room for doubt respecting the responsibility one has for one's thoughts. Thoughts are simple, elemental beings that follow slavishly the impulse that is given to them. They mostly express their own consciousness when the process of thinking gets out of control. Many psychological disturbances could possibly be prevented if these facts were known and the knowledge of these things would be correctly applied. In order to illustrate the process of thinking, one can think of the technique of transmitting radio or television waves. A receiver can pick up certain frequencies and by attuning to one of the channel's messages are made visible and can be understood. Likewise, a person picks up thought waves that lie within his bandwidth of thought frequencies. In the case of the human thinking faculty, it is clear that this can function both as a transmitter and receiver of thoughts. When we look at a child, we can observe that it has its own character already at birth. Gradually it starts expressing its character during the first years of its life. This character forms, so to speak, the bandwidth within which thoughts can be received or perceived. Parenting, school, and all kinds of other factors influence the child and limit this bandwidth further by offering a narrow perspective on life. Not that the child doesn't resist tradition and prejudice, for example in puberty, but the environment's influences are usually too strong to resist. And so another decent citizen is born, neatly adapted to the utilitarian way of life. Note, today that current forms of education will not do any longer since a transition to a healthy, harmonious way of life has become a bare necessity for humanity's survival. This explains why new, refreshing ideas have so much trouble entering into the human mind. Our minds are just too crystallized in traditional concepts and notions of life. The receiving brain mind can only pick up thoughts of certain frequencies and retransmit them. This fact is unconsciously or even consciously misused for commercial and political ends. How to change all this? First of all, the process of change should begin with the individual himself, because he or she must realize in which mental situation or state he or she is in. Then only he can decide to change his or her way of thinking. He or she can tune in to other frequencies of thought, that is, tune in to the higher aspects of thinking, more refined qualities of thought. A simple technique to neutralize negative thoughts. Now, we won't book any success if we try to combat our character faults. Why not? This is because by combat we feed our thoughts, which are living beings. So they will grow stronger instead of starving to death. Instead of combat, we should forget about the unwanted thoughts, let them die. For this we need recognition of these thoughts and give them a positive impulse by simply thinking an opposite, positive thought. By thinking and acting according to this positive thought we outbalance, the effects of the negative thought. By persisting in this practice we can change the quality of thoughts and also make our thinking faculty function on other frequencies, more altruistic, spiritual, positive, etc. After some practice we will no longer receive these negative thoughts. We may notice or observe them but do not allow them to upset us. I'm addressing myself to reasonably healthy people here. Others may need psychotherapy to effect an integration and positive orientation towards life. Note, the above applies to personal prejudices, not to a justified anger towards the many quirks of our current political financial economic system. The 7 aspects of thinking. The wisdom tradition enumerates 7 aspects of thinking as follows: physical, emotional, vital, desire, intellect, intuition, inspiration. In my first book, See Above, I have described these aspects in some detail. Here, I will summarize some of that material. Quotes are from my book as mentioned above. Note that this information forms part of an epistemology. What can we know and how can we know it? Appendix A gives a very brief summary of an ontology, a philosophy of being. The ladder of beings is described there, without explanation of their genesis. The reader is referred to the literature mentioned in later chapters, especially the writings of William Quan Judge and Gottfried de Puricher. The physical aspect of thinking is concerned with bodily care and necessities. This is obviously necessary to some degree. Too much attention to the body detracts from the other aspects, as will be clear. The emotional aspect of thinking refers to the sense impressions on the mind, and the reaction one gives to one's perception. Too much of this can degenerate into sentimentalism. It might be a good idea to read some of the writings of followers of the Stoicism, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. Nowadays, the ideas of the Stoa gain some traction to help people get some peace of mind. I will get back to Marcus Aurelius further on. The vital aspect of thinking refers to activity of mind in concrete action. For an example of excess expression of vitality, think of managers that want to plan and deal with every minute detail in business. Otherwise, it is a good thing to follow up on one's plans. The desire aspect of thinking is often misunderstood. Desire is a neutral force, like electricity that flows through a wire. It can be used for good and for bad. In my first book, I wrote, "Understanding the motive for our actions is of fundamental importance in the process of acquiring self-knowledge. This motive can be selfish or selfless. Rather than talking about good or bad, which are relative terms, different in each culture and historical period, we can better use the terms selfish or selfless as a criterion for judging our own acts and thoughts. We can deceive ourselves, however, by subtle motives. For example, ambitions may be altruistic or, on the other hand, may involve quite a bit of egoism, pride, etc. It takes a lot of sincerity to see our motives clearly for what they are. According to the degree of developed discernment or understanding, we will recognize these subtle motives. Are we slaves of our passions or do we control our mind's activities? This important subject is part of the discussion Krishna has with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. Example of higher form, lofty aspirations. Example of lower form, gross passions. The intellectual aspect of thinking is only one aspect of thinking, and not the highest. Intellect works mostly with isolating problems out of their context. It gives fragmented, partial knowledge. It has a limited ability to get to the core or essence of things, unless coupled with real understanding. It often leads to fighting against symptoms, solving nothing. It mostly only processes thought, usually without much creativity. Higher form, use of intellect to work out practical solutions in the context of really understanding what the core of a problem is or what a situation is really about. Note, this requires some intuition already. Lower form, blindly relying on models in science or wherever, without the necessary understanding of their inherent limits and shortcomings. The intuitive aspect of thinking refers not to pure intellectuality, but to a deep understanding of things, people, situations. One can grasp a situation in a flash of insight and see a solution to the problem at hand. We see this with the mental eye, so to speak. It can take considerable time after this flash of insight occurs for us to work this out in a systematic fashion by use of one's intellectual aspect. Understanding is involved with grasping the relationship between parts and the whole. One sees the relationship between science, spirituality, and philosophy. One appreciates the fact that one cannot really separate the individual from the collective, etc. One recognizes the built-in harmony and order in man, nature, and, in the cosmos in general. This aspect of thinking can be called the enlightenment aspect. If one has fully developed this aspect, not only on the thinking level, but above that, one is technically called a Buddha. Example, using one's understanding of things to help others, to improve conditions of humanity. The inspirational aspect of thinking. The influence of inspiration can be seen in great works of art. Also, mystics of all ages have witnessed great visions in a state of unity consciousness, an experience of the actual wholeness of all life. Sometimes we ourselves feel connected to all beings, to life in general, absorbed into a feeling of unity, while walking in a forest. In general terms, we can identify ourselves with this aspect only through developing our understanding or intuitive faculty. Examples, bringing new concepts into science, based on genuine intuition, like Max Planck, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, creating masterpieces of art. If all 7 aspects of thinking are completely developed, we can speak of a truly complete, harmonious, wholesome human being. We have transcended our personality to open ourselves for the influx of the spirit within. The motto can be, seek and you will find, or attune to the inner layers of consciousness in yourself and get some understanding. Exercises. 1. Now that you have studied the 7 aspects of thinking, can you name 1 or 2 dominating aspects working in or through your mind? How can you tell? How much time do you allow these aspects, and others, to dominate your thinking? Write your answers down. 2. Apply the method for neutralizing a negative thought on a daily basis. Write down your experiences. Does counting to 10 before you react give you the necessary time to imagine a positive thought?